Hey everybody, it's Jay. Today will be an unusual video. Again, this is going to be a pretty subjective, opinion-y video, and also based on a lot of experience that I've had over the years with different guns, and particularly around the community around different guns. So I'm going to be talking about my best bad guns. What do I mean by bad guns? I mean guns that either the gun itself or the manufacturer of said gun has at one time enjoyed a negative reputation, either in the past or currently has enjoyed a negative reputation by the hive mind on the internet. So by hive mind, I mean a very vocal minority of individuals who post comments on the internet. So this is not to say that I think any of these guns are bad. In fact, all of these guns that I'm going to talk about, I think are actually quite good. Some more so than others and some in different ways than others. But all of these guns at one time or another have been much maligned by the internet, I think often unfairly. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And again, very subjective, non-factual, entertainment-focused video for as entertaining as we can be around here, I guess. I'm going to start with the notorious garbage rod, so-called garbage rod. Still is referred to as a garbage rod on the internet. I think almost more lovingly called garbage rod now than seriously called. And I think the reason why these have that reputation or had that reputation at one time was because they were very cheap. Whenever I bought my first Mosin M9130, which is what I'm talking about here, I paid $125. I, at the time, thought that I got ripped off because after I bought that, which I bought on Gunbroker, I started seeing Mosins locally with sling, with a stripper clip pouch, and with a bayonet for $89 locally. So these guns have been extremely cheap on the commercial market. Nowadays, I feel like the reputation has turned a corner on them, but also good luck finding them for under $300 or so. I sold that same Mosin for $125 for $350 later on, and that was on the lower end of what they were going for online. This one is one manufactured in 1921, so a pretty old one, but came to us, by us I mean me and Misha, me by way of Misha, came completely packed in Cosmoline and obviously had been stored for a long time. And I found that it is in pretty decent condition. And that brings me to one of the points about why these had the reputation of being a garbage rod. At least my perception of why it had developed that reputation is a lot of these were just beat to crap. For $89, a lot of people, I think, took them and abused them and shot corrosive ammunition through them and didn't clean them and had really rusty, corroded bores, which led to accuracy issues and so on and so forth. So a cheap gun is going to have the perception, I think, of being worth less, inherently worth less than a more expensive gun, which, because financially it is, that doesn't necessarily mean that the gun is poorly made or lesser well made than any other gun that's more expensive. I'd be willing to bet that people who have bought Mosins for over $300 have a higher opinion of them than the people who bought them for $89, or at least in some cases. And that's only because the perception of value is different between those two individuals. And it may not be. I've always had roughly the same opinion of them. And whenever I bought my first one, that they were just solid, functional, if not very straightforwardly made. I'm not going to say crude, but certainly very straightforwardly made, purpose-built, mass-produced bolt-action rifles. Talking about corrosive ammunition, I think that is another issue why these earned the garbage rod reputation on the internet. A lot of the ammunition, the surplus ammunition that we've gotten over the years has become known to be machine gun ammunition. So heavy ball machine gun ammunition that was never meant for accuracy shooting. And at one time or another, you could get a big crate of Mosin ammunition of 7.62 by 54R surplus for, a few pennies around. And that ammunition, in my experience, has never been particularly accurate. With the first Mosin that I ever bought for myself, which is the one that I sold, with that ammunition shooting at about 150 yards is the last time that I shot it, I was getting like 8-inch group accuracy with it. But using the same exact ammunition in my Vepr 54R, which was a new gun with a pristine bore, shooting the same ammunition at 100 yards was 5 or 6-inch groups with that. So really not any better at all. And that was shooting with a scope versus non-scoped on a short sight radius like this. So I think that ammunition, both being corrosive, people having a very low value opinion of them for them being under $100, shooting corrosive ammunition, letting the corrosive salts build up, let the bore get rusted and lose rifling and get pitted and lose accuracy, and then handing that off, selling it off to someone else, also probably for dirt cheap, has given them a negative and unfairly, in my opinion, negative reputation. And also, by the way, I'm speaking specifically to Russian M9130s, which are a little more rough around the edges than, say, like the Finnish or the Polish Mosin Nagants. The triggers are not particularly great with these. They're pretty tough, and they vary wildly between rifles. But there are certainly good examples of 9130s that are not beat to crap by the U.S. commercial market, and this in particular is one of them. And yeah, very solid rifles. And for a long time were the de facto beginner milsurp rifle of choice because cheap ammunition and cheap starting point. So now next up, I'm going to talk about Romanian AKs. For my Romanian AK stand-in, I have this RPK AES 10B. Now the AES 10B has never been maligned, but Romanian AKs certainly have been in the past. For a long time, what I would see on the internet is people would ask, what should I get for my first AK? And some people would say, you know, a Wasser will suit you just fine. But a shockingly large number of people would say, don't buy a Wasser, spend an extra $400 or $600 or $800 and get an Arsenal. Starting around 2012, the supply on Romanian AKs, particularly the Wasser 10, started to dry up because of the 2012 panic. And once that happened, people realized they couldn't get them. They started paying exorbitant prices for Romanian AKs that were otherwise considered bottom-of-the-barrel, dirt-cheap, entry-level AKs. What I noticed is whenever the prices went up, the reputation also went up on them. So suddenly they became kind of like garbage entry-level guns that you probably are better off spending more money and buying something else, to the best AKs ever made. Now, the truth is that they have always been solid AKs, at least in my experience, and I know in Misha's experience as well, but they've always been a little rough around the edges. From a fit and finish standpoint, they haven't been as nice looking out of the box as something like an Arsenal or even the Zastava guns. But as we all know with AKs, the fit and finish is rarely ever an issue whenever it comes to function. And by and large, Romanian AKs have a reputation now, a very deserved reputation in my opinion, of being very well built, very reliable, very workmanlike AKs. Certainly not the fanciest, but very, very solid AKs. Now, what drove that reputation back then was, again, as I mentioned, the fit and finish. Oftentimes the finish is a pretty coarse park that shows scratches pretty easily. Now, this is a high round count. I've got about 5,000 rounds on this AES 10B. This is the first AK that I ever bought for myself. I picked it up from Misha. That's the first time I met Misha as well. But you can see that it shows a lot of scratches. It shows a lot of dings and scuffs. If left unoiled for a long time, I've seen these things rusting out on the shelf from the finish. So, and the other big thing was canted sights. Canted sights was a big talking point with Romanian AKs back in the day, particularly with Wasser 10s. And I've talked about this with Misha many times over. Our general opinion is if you can sight the gun in, the canted sights are not really an issue. And so I think that a lot of people, and I'm not saying that you can't have canted sights that are so bad you can't sight the gun in, that is a problem, but I think that the panic over canted sights was greatly exaggerated. I do remember very specifically people posting pictures of their AKs with plumb bobs run down from their front sight posts, saying, are my sights canted? They look like they could be just a little bit off. You know, can somebody look at these pictures and tell me if my sights are canted? I'm afraid, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, and there was a lot of that. There was a lot of just hemming and hawing over canted sights. And the thing of it is if you can't tell looking at it that they're canted, they're probably not canted enough for it to matter. And if they are canted enough to where you can't sight the gun in, obviously that's a problem. I actually did have that M1960, which is a Polish parts kit gun made by Century Arms, which is basically an AK-47 Type 3. That one actually did have canted sights so bad that when I pushed the front sight post all the way over, I still couldn't quite get zeroed. I laid that down on my floor and put my knee on the receiver and grabbed a rubber mallet, and I hit the front sight like twice, the front sight base twice, with a rubber mallet about as hard as I could, and I was able to put the front post in the center and zero the gun and had no issues with it. So I don't think that that the whole canted front sight issue, it was nearly as big of an issue as what the internet made it out to be. It's kind of funny because you don't hear about canted front sights hardly at all anymore on AKs. And I don't know if it's just because people aren't picky about it anymore, or if the manufacturing has gotten tighter and Eastern European manufacturers have realized that that is something that the American commercial market is going to gripe about endlessly, is having a canted front sight. So I'm sure it still does happen. And again, I'm sure it's bad enough that it's an actual issue that needs to be addressed probably by the manufacturer. But I also don't think it was nearly as widespread as the internet made it out to be, or even as big a problem as it made it out to be. So yeah, Romanian AKs at one time or another, like I said, had a very middling to almost poor reputation on the internet, even though, like I said, I know talking to Misha right off the bat, he was always a big fan of any import Romanian Kugier made AK because they were solidly made. This is no exception as well. My AES-10B, the very first gun or AK that I bought. Now, I do even remember with the AES-10Bs, people were asking about RPKs on the forums and stuff, and a lot of times people would wave them away from the AES-10B and tell them to get an M72 instead, as a Stava M72 RPK instead, which I assume has to do with just, again, the perception of quality between Romanian and every other country that made AKs. It's kind of interesting to see the difference between where Chinese AKs were then as also the cream of the crop AK compared to even Wassers, which were considered bottom of the barrel. So that was all pre-IO Inc. days. That was pre Pioneer Arms Corporation days. So that definitely helps give you a little bit of perspective when looking about what truly garbage AKs can be. But Wasser, Kugier, and those types of AKs generally are very good. So we'll go ahead and get the elephant in the room out of the way. Maybe this could be called a white elephant. This is my Highpoint 995 TS carbine. Now I've added a Hightower Armory bullpup conversion stock for this because, quite frankly, the factory stock, as well as a lot of the controls on the factory gun, could be better. And the Hightower Armory bullpup conversion addresses a lot of those issues. If you're interested in finding out what all those issues are, go check out the review that I did on the Hightower Armory bullpup conversion. There is a lot of nose thumbing at Highpoint. And I think the reason why that is because, first and foremost, they look, in my opinion, and I realize this is a controversial statement for some reason, but in my opinion, they look kind of bad. They look generally pretty ugly, pretty cheaply made, and they are cheaply made, quite frankly. Highpoint's whole goal is to get a minimum viable product out the door so that way as many people who need a gun can get a gun and be able to afford to buy it and shoot it. Now, it is true, at least in my experience with this Highpoint carbine, is there are corners cut in materials. The stock, which you can see in the Hightower Armory video that I did, you can basically take the stock and grab it in two hands and snap it in half. It's a very soft plastic, and the fit and finish, like on the internals, is really rough. Like I could see thumbprints where someone stuck the thumb in the unfinished or the still curing finish on the gun. So a really rough fit and finish. The trigger on either the factory gun or this are pretty bad, and also you're limited to single stack mags. All that to say, in terms of making a minimum viable product, Highpoint has succeeded in doing that, at least in my experience, and evidently the experience of a lot of other people. The guns tend to work and work very well, and supposedly they have very good customer service. I've never had to make use of the very good customer service because I've never had an issue with this gun. The only issue that I've had with it is with the Red Ball 20-round aftermarket mags, which I've never been able to get to work 100% in this gun. They've always hitched a little bit, but the factory mags 100%. So these definitely are trashed a lot on the internet, and while I do think there is something to be said for the quality of material of components that are used, I'm not really sure how much that translates into the quality of materials on structurally integral parts, so things that make the gun safe to fire. From what I understand, the Highpoint guns are safe to fire and they're reliable. And if you just need a gun that's safe to fire and reliable, then the Highpoint meets that requirement. Then everything else that goes on top of it, like mil-spec polymers, double stack mags, sights, and so on and so forth, are things that you would look into another brand potentially and pay a little extra for to get. Ergonomics, looks, and so on. So this particular gun, this Highpoint 995 TS, like I said, has been 100% reliable for me. And honestly, it's a lot of fun to shoot. I put it very relatively high in my ranking of top 13 pistol caliber carbines because I do find it very fun to shoot. Particularly with this Hightower Armory bullpup conversion. Now we've gotten rid of the really chunky, kind of ugly looking factory stock made of really, really soft plastic to something with closer to mil-spec polymer, metal accessory rails, better ergonomics and controls and all that stuff. Highpoints get dumped on a lot. It's fun to do it. It's fun to kind of make fun of Highpoints. We had the whole Eat Cannon thing that went on here not too long ago, which featured HK making fun of Highpoint, but then also telling Highpoint to make fun of themselves, and it's okay to do that. And that's perfectly fine. It's okay to poke fun at things, at objects, and ourselves, for that matter. But at the end of the day, the guns work. At least my experience is that they work, and with a lot of other people's experience, what they work. So I definitely don't blame anyone for wanting to drop an extra $200 or $300 and getting a Glock over a Highpoint. Certainly, if I had to pick one gun, that's what I would do as well. I certainly wouldn't trade this for my Scorpion Evo 3. But it's nice to have those options for people who want them and can't get other ones for either financial or location-based reasons. Up next, we have the Century C308. This is actually made, barreled and receivered by PTR. And PTR has a pretty solid reputation for making G3 clones, and this is effectively a Set-Me kind of G3 hybrid, more Set-Me than G3. We have Set-Me rotating sights. We do have a welded-on rail up here that mine has been very straight on, and the welds are actually very nice looking on it. Came with Century Arms weird flash hider thing, or it's not a flash hider at all, it's a muzzle brake. Decidedly not a flash hider. Mine originally came with all polymer furniture. I bought a very cheap Set-Me parts kit and put Set-Me furniture on it to make it look a little nicer, in my opinion, with this wood furniture and a metal lower. It weighs a ton now, but it is really attractive at the very least. I still see these getting dumped on the internet today as being terrible guns. My experience has not been that it is a terrible gun. I have over 1,000 rounds in mine, and in 1,000 rounds I had one failure that I believe was due to an old Set-Me steel magazine, which you can see I have in here. This one has been reasonably accurate, usually shooting just under 2-inch groups at 100 yards, depending on the ammunition I choose to use. I have this ACSS Primary Arms 1-6X, so 1-6? Yeah, 1-6X reticle on it, but it has been really reliable. Personally, I actually think the roller delay blowback 308s are some of the most fun 308s to shoot. It's very smooth and reasonably accurate, battle rifle accurate, not attack driver. The trigger in this one is actually not too bad. For a roller delayed style gun, a lot of the HK pattern lower triggers are really pretty crappy. This one is actually relatively crisp for one of those types of triggers. Definitely not match grade. Definitely not as good as my BRN 10 with the trigger that I put in it. But it's, yeah, it's been 100% reliable, really fun, and being made by PTR, at least barreled and on the receiver by PTR, I have no reason to believe that it's not well made. But I have heard a lot of people make comments about these being really bad guns and to avoid them. And that's not been my experience. I only have a sample size of one, so I can't say they're all going to be good, but this one's been good to go. And I think I paid about $600 for it whenever I bought mine. Now, I'm not sure I would pay a lot more for it because I was looking at getting a PTR, and Misha happened to have these, and the price difference was $300 or $400 at the time. So I don't regret the purchase at all. It's been a really nice stand-in for a G3/Set-Me. So yeah, it's been a shockingly good gun for that cheap for a semi-auto 308. I just have no complaints at all. Nice, decent trigger, decent accuracy, 100% reliable for me. So yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at some of the guns that I like the most that the internet, either currently or at some point in the past, has generally not liked, considered to be bad guns, that I think are quite good guns, at least the ones that I have, the examples that I have, and the experience in some cases with other guns that we've shot over the many years in this channel have had experience with. So Romanian guns, M9130s, the Highpoint carbine, and the Set-Me, I should say Century C308 Sporter here. They've all been good for me. So your experience certainly may vary, but that's been my experience so far. So yeah, these are my best of the bad guns from the internet. Hope you liked the video. Please click like if you did. Be sure to subscribe to us if you haven't already, and check out the link to our Patreon page if you want to help support us. And we will see you again soon next time.